Now, with Montgomery County students, Montgomery College and MCPS have an agreement for students to be waived out of taking any type of college placement examination and be placed at college level when they're done with high school. And there are ways that students can be placed at college level when they enter Montgomery College is by either earning a 2.75 unweighted overall when they graduate, or if they have taken an English 101, or if they have taken an honor English 12, an AP language or compositions, or modern world history, and they would have a score, a little code that's called APPE, which means that we would know the students, they have to score a B or better, however, and we would know the students would be placed at college level. Same thing if they have taken an algebra 2 and score a B or better, they wouldn't have to take a placement test and be placed at college level at Montgomery College. Now, if the students decide to take the SAT, for the SAT for college level, it would be 480 or above in reading and 530 in math. For SAT, for ACT, it would be 21 for reading and 21 for math. Again, with the Accuplacer, it has to be 263 or above to be placed at college level. I mentioned a little bit earlier that you can take the Accuplacer at certain schools in Montgomery County, that they do offer that. At Montgomery College, it is the Montgomery College Assessment Center. And again, right now we are not offering that, but instead of the Accuplacer, you can take the remote placement, which means that you can take it from home. Again, the ESL assessments for the Accuplacer is not available at your high school. It is only available at Montgomery College. Okay, if you would like to prepare for the Accuplacer, you can always visit the Accuplacer, accuplacer.collegeboard.org, or you can practice using links that we have at Montgomery College website in the assessment page. At Montgomery College, we also offer courses that prepare you to take the SAT or ACT as well. So make sure that you visit our website and check it out. If you have any questions, you can always send me an email. And my email is jimmy.wynn@montgomerycollege.edu, or you can contact Raptor Central at montgomerycollege.edu. I am done.
Thanks so much, Jimmy. Are there any questions out there? I did see one question in the chat about the PSAT. Are there any questions about the Accuplacer? That was really informative to me. I did not have the right understanding of what that was. Thank you. Thank you. Any other questions for Jimmy Wynn? Okay, great. Kate Heald, if you're out there, there's a question in the chat about the PSAT. I would defer to you if you're able to answer that. Otherwise, we'll come back around to that at the end, EG. All right, Capital Educators.
All right.
Phil and I have known each other for a long time, so we're going to be all friendly and collegial and do.
Yeah, we're gonna do this collaboratively here. So,
yeah, gotcha.
Thanks for sticking around, everyone. Again, I'm Phil Pine. I'm the founder and director of Capital Educators. I'm joined by Aaron, who is the education director at Prep Matters. We're going to be talking about the SAT and ACT together. But before I turn this over to you, Aaron, to get into some of the nitty-gritty differences between the tests, I want to just jump in from really 30,000 feet and talk about test optional admissions and what that may mean to you all as you roll towards 12th grade and into college. Where are we now? As you probably know, high school students who just graduated last June, those in the class of 2021, faced a landscape that was almost purely test optional, which means these kids were able to apply pretty much wherever they wanted, okay, with or without a standardized test score, okay? Now, there's some exceptions to the rule. If you look at maybe the 500 or so most popular colleges, I think we were able to find almost 36, which are not quite test optional, which are test blind, meaning you not only not only do you not have to take the test, but if you did decide to share a score, these admissions offices would ignore those numbers. And there are even fewer places that require either an SAT or an ACT number. But everyone else falls into this wide swath of being test optional. And we are not seeing that change for our current seniors in the class of 2022. And to be candid, we don't think there will be dramatic changes for the junior class as well, the current class of 2023, okay? Now, why is that? I mean, there are a bunch of different reasons, and certainly the pandemic fueled many of them. But if you look at it big picture, okay, going test optional tends to benefit almost everyone, to be honest with you. For starters, colleges see almost immediate benefits. The second an institution stops requiring these tests, the number of applications it receives shoots way up. And that's because more students feel more emboldened, right, to apply more places without numbers. Another thing that happens that people don't talk about as much is that very quietly, colleges see their average incoming test scores improve, the average numbers for their incoming freshmen.
And can I jump in there for a second?
Please.
So, yeah, no, and sometimes it's not quiet, right?
You're right.
Like Boston College, school that all of you know, the average SAT score at Boston College before the pandemic was a 1413. Last year it was a 1495, right? That is a tremendous jump in an average score. UGA, right? The 25th to 75th percentiles at UGA were a 28 to 33 on the ACT. Pandemic year, 31 to a 34. Right, so kind of there's a little caveat emptor. Be careful when you're looking at those average scores before and after the pandemic. But great point, Phil.
No, I totally agree, and your point is well taken. When you all are in your senior years and looking at average scores across colleges, you need to make sure you're looking at the most current data because it is changing so rapidly. So, like big picture, you look at it from an admissions office's standpoint. They're getting more applications, which drops their acceptance rate. They're reporting higher incoming scores, and they're doing all that all while pursuing something truly enviable, which is better access for students from all over the country, particularly those from underserved areas and at weaker high schools. If that's not really your great concern, like where this benefits colleges, we can make it a little more personal. How does it help kids? Well, to some degree, it does widen the path for admission at some schools for students who might have found the average SAT scores to be prohibitively high originally. But I think it's the second bullet point here that matters far more. What test optional tends to mean for families is that you all have much greater control over an important part of the application process. So for starters, you can opt literally never to take these tests. Now, if you read between the lines, Aaron and I are not going to recommend that all that actively. And that's because you have many options after you test now. Really, the name of the game now is take these exams, collect your scores, and then in a very sober and wise fashion, figure out what to do with them. For some of your students, they will do well enough on these tests that their scores will be helpful to them when they apply everywhere to all of the colleges that are on their list. For others, I'll be honest, even with test preparation and some earnest work, they may never be able to get their scores up to the level where they mesh with grades. And those students may be in the opposite camp and decide to shield their scores from all of their colleges. And what Aaron and I, and probably so many of the tutors and counselors see now, is that most students fall somewhere in the middle, which is there are going to be some colleges on your list, okay, that would probably be very happy to look at your scores. And there may be other colleges on your list whose averages are so high that your numbers will not help as much. There's a little bit of art and science in determining what to do with your scores in the fall of senior year. And I don't think for our purposes today that fixating on that is really the answer. I think the bigger picture idea is we really don't want sophomores and juniors ruling out standardized testing because they've heard of something called test optional, okay? Because for many of your kids, having a data point like a test score could actually play a pivotal role in tilting the admissions decision in their favor. Aaron, please jump in. I know I've talked a lot.
Oh, sure. No, and actually, let me address a question that popped up in the chat here, if I may. Do colleges know if your student used a prep class when they apply? No, they don't, nor do they know if your student had accommodations, right? So if you've got a student who has extended time or any of various accommodations, there's no asterisk next to the score. That being said, right, in the kind of environment that we're in, right, that was kind of started by the pandemic, but really fueled by more social justice and access issues, right? There are people out there talking about, should the Common App actually have a question that asks those things, right? Are you working with an independent educational counselor? Might be a question on the Common App one day. Have you done test preparation? Might be a question on the Common Application one day. It is not going to be a question that your son or daughter, if you have a junior, will face, but it's something that's kind of the way the winds are blowing. And in the future, those sorts of disclosures might be asked of students. Currently, I don't see any of that happening.
While we're paused on chat questions, if I could jump in, someone asked, do some colleges prefer the SAT as opposed to the ACT?
Oh, no, they really don't. There's if you're out there wondering about this, or if you took the SAT and don't know what ACT scores mean, or vice versa, if you just pop into Google SAT ACT concordance, right, there's a chart that says this score on the SAT equals that score on the ACT, and colleges accept them uniformly and put kids on the same scale. It's a sad fact. There used to be a school, the last college in the country that took the SAT but not the ACT, was the Webb School of Naval Architecture, and it was a great punchline, but now even they will take the ACT. You're really not handicapping yourself in any way.
Yeah, I feel like sometimes parents have trouble believing this based on where you grew up and what your personal testing history was. Certainly if you're from this area or anywhere on either of the coasts, you probably never touched an ACT back in your high school days. And if you're from the Midwest, maybe the opposite is true, but it's not even a wink, wink implied thing anymore. Colleges literally do not care, which is why we really do want to focus the thrust of this evening on, okay, which test might convey an advantage to your student, and how can you make a wise call in figuring that out.
And I totally agree with you, Kate. Taking both is absolutely the way to go if you're going to make a time investment of prepping for one of these tests. Certainly the investment of 3.5 hours to each to see how you're due, to make sure you're following the path of least resistance, is a wise investment of your time and energy. So let's kind of turn then to comparing the SAT and the ACT in a more granular way. Right, so here we see a little graphic just showing the different sections on the SAT and ACT, and they are clearly both tests of the things you expect them to be: tests of English, tests of grammar, tests of math, tests of reading, right? And if I can say one thing about this, right, they're not intelligence tests, they're not IQ tests. They are in fact tests of acquired skills, just like any other test in life. And as you know, how do we acquire skills? Through practice. Right, that practice could be, your kid alone who's super motivated, going to r/SAT and downloading 1 million SATs and doing them over the course of 3 months, and then going and rocking SAT. That's one way to prepare. Taking a class is another way to prepare. Using a one-on-one tutor is another way to prepare. But it's really about doing the work, putting in the practice, because that's how we get results. So these tests are now more similar than they are different. They're perhaps both too long, right? If you add it up, they both check in at around 3 hours. So I would advocate that no matter which road you choose, SAT or ACT, or which method of testing, you work in some full-length practice tests into whatever you're trying to do. Because success on these tests is as much about knowing the grammar rules and the math rules as it is about a kid's ability to stay cool, make good decisions over the course of a 3.5-hour standardized test. And unfortunately, kids, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, they don't have a lot of experience taking 3.5-hour tests. And I don't know of any way to practice that other than to do it. Right? So make sure that full-length practice testing is a key component of whatever preparation method you choose for your son or daughter. The other thing that might jump out at you from here is that the ACT is a science section. So this is something that we talk a lot about, and in as much as we're going to talk about the fact that the ACT is the more straightforward test, Probably the least straightforward thing the ACT has ever done was to call this the science test. If they were being a little more honest, they'd call it the reading charts and graphs test. So if you've got out there a student who loves science, super STEM kid, you might be saying to yourself, ooh, they're definitely going to take the ACT because that is the science section. Or conversely, if you've got a super STEM phobic kid, you might be saying, oh, no, not the ACT science. Not really true. These tests are not as much about science as you would imagine, right? Just like the reading sections. They don't ask kids random questions about the Great Gatsby and the Grapes of Wrath because they're standardized tests and they can't do that. In the same way, the science section is not asking kids random questions about bio and chem and physics. It's doing what the reading section does. Hey, kid, read this. Now answer these questions. So structurally about the same. One thing that might jump out at you, however, is that ACT has an optional essay that the SAT got rid of. I don't know of any colleges that are really requiring that optional essay. I think the service academies did last year. I don't know if they're still going to do that, but generally, don't sign up to take the ACT with writing. It's probably not worth your time. Would you agree with that, Phil?
Yes. I haven't heard definitively about this coming year, but my guess is it's going away even at the academies.
Yeah, I think the reason it's staying is because a lot of states, right, have contracts with the ACT in the Midwest as their like high school exit exam, and to fulfill some of those state requirements, they need an essay portion. So my understanding is that's why it's still an optional component of the ACT, so it can still serve that purpose for states that choose to use it in that way. But as a college application tool, yeah, the essay is just not something that you need to spend any time on.
I can just add one comment and then I'll
Go
let
ahead.
you keep going. My feeling is these kinds of charts are really helpful in just getting a big picture sense for the differences between the ACT and SAT. But as Aaron and I and most people in the field will tell you, you really don't want to pick your poison purely based off the look of a chart. Okay, like, oh, that science looks great, or it doesn't, or oh, the SAT has more math on it. I really think that most students see the most value in trying one full exam of each type. Now, Kate was generous enough to convey that all of the BCC students are going to be able to take the PSAT in school on October 13th. That's happening. On top of that, Aaron's group and my group are going to be giving full-length practice tests later in the fall as well. So Brett Matters will be doing an ACT on November 6th. Capital Educators, my group, will do a full SAT on December 11th. If you avail yourself of these practice exams, your student may be in very good shape in terms of being able to compare not only the scores that they have, but also just the experience, okay? Was one test just a more comfortable format for your child or over the other?
Yeah, and to answer some other questions from the chat, yeah, are the questions all multiple choice? They are on the ACT. The SAT math sections do have a few questions where students have to grid in their own answers, but by and large, they're both multiple choice tests. Yeah.
And while we're paused on chat questions, one that I got here is, can you talk about timing and what year to take the exams for students who are taking accelerated classes? For example, a 10th grader taking some advanced classes, pre-calc chem, should they take the test in fall of junior year while the subject matters are fresh?
Mm-hmm.
Let me start here and then Aaron jump in when I screw up. All right, so.
Oh, we're right on the slide.
It just magically pops up. So the one thing this is meant to convey is there are plenty of opportunities to sit for these tests. Okay, I can make the dates appear and disappear. There are basically 3 seasons for doing this. Okay, the most popular time for students to sit for these tests tends to be in the 2nd semester of junior year, anywhere from February on the ACT side, really through May on the SAT side. This is when groups like ours are seeing the greatest number of students sitting for standardized tests.
And does someone on the call know what date the school day test is going to be? I believe MCPS offers school day testing. If someone could pop that in the chat, that might be super helpful for people to plan.
Yeah, that date won't be set for a while. It's probably going to be in April, but it hasn't. The PSAT was just announced yesterday for October 13th. The SAT for juniors will be in the spring sometime, probably in April, but it's going to be a while before we know the date.
Okay. But students will have the opportunity to do that as part of their school day.
Yes, that is correct.
So that's typically a free and super accessible way to sit for an SAT. But to kind of answer your question, every year, particularly if you travel in certain circles, you're going to discover more and more students testing early. And so these fall dates end up staring you in the face. There are a few reasons why students might decide to test early, but I would say this, I think it's fine to do so if you have a reason. So for example, if your child is going to be a recruited athlete, okay, and you get the sense that a coach will be breathing down your neck for scores, that might be a reason to prepare early and test early. If your student is a super high scorer, just a naturally strong test taker, okay, they might decide, you know what, I'm going to do well whether I do this in October or whether I wait till March. Maybe I'll just get it out of the way earlier. And then the third type of student might say, you know what, my summer leading into junior year is so clear. I have so much time. Maybe I'll capitalize on those hours, do my preparation early and sit for the test early. So there are any number of reasons why you might pick a test date. But Aaron, you can speak to this too. I kind of feel like picking the test date isn't so much about picking the one Saturday morning when you're free. It's about backing out and realizing that you actually have a legitimate amount of time to do your studying.
Yeah, 100% agree, right? I mean, you'll hear urban legends discussed by students about which test dates are easier or harder, but trust me when I tell you that's all garbage. It is not, that's not how the test is scored. There's no easier or harder test, but there might be a better or worse day for you to take the test. So I want students to look at their own personal schedules. What are you doing? Are you a wrestler, right? Are you sucking weight between, December and February 20 pounds lighter than you should be and can't think straight? That's a really bad time to take a test, right? Are you super involved in the spring musical, right? Does that take 3 hours every day after school for a month leading up to that thing? Probably a bad time to take the test, right? So all of Phil's considerations are absolutely valid. I'll also say this, APs come into play for students who are really loading up on APs in junior year. That's going to be happening in May, and the extent to which this standardized testing can be over before then generally makes for happier AP testers when they don't have to worry about the SAT or ACT anymore, and that's off their plate for sure. One other final thing is that I think a lot of this, and we providers think a lot of this is really motivated by stress and anxiety, right? And for students who can start early, just feeling all of that runway ahead of you, knowing that there are many opportunities to be successful, can take some of the pressure off certain students, where starting late, it just feels like, oh no, I only have 1 or 2 shots at this before summer. Oh no, what do I do? So that's something you might want to think about as well.
Completely agree. But you know what? The opposite is also true. I definitely see plenty of students who are not anxious about this, for whom starting too early and dragging this process out for 12 to 18 months just may not be the right fit. So you have to know yourself as a tester, and as a parent, you need to know your kid as well and make a quality decision. In my experience, and Aaron, you can add to this, I feel like most students end up spending 2 to 4 dozen total hours to sort of and well spent hours to sort of hit their maximum, to sort of peak on where they're going to end up scoring. And so it's just a question of how you want to schedule and structure that time. Obviously, there's a select few that doesn't need quite that much time, and there are others who need more. But I would say the overwhelming majority is falling somewhere in that range.
Yeah, no, that seems reasonable to me as well, for sure.
Could I jump in with a question
Oh,
here?
please.
So obviously students can take this test more than once. I see Kate saying, there's a plateau and 3 is max. Could you talk a little bit about the process when they take it in terms of colleges automatically getting their scores?
Yeah, great question.
How do you make sure they get the highest score and the best?
Yeah. Yeah, there is no automatic mechanism by which colleges can suck these scores out of the College Board and the ACT, right? You have to send your scores. Generally scores are sent by date, right? So if you take the test 2 or 3 times, you can say, hey, I'm going to send the February ACT, but I'm not going to send the December ACT. You're in control of your scores. In fact, the ACT, if you don't like some of the scores, you can call the ACT and like literally delete the score record. Poof, it's gone. Right. And the other component to discuss there is what's called super scoring, right? Some schools, a majority of schools really, tend to consider students under the super scored number. So what we mean by that, for example, on the ACT, the composite score is 1 through 36. Right. So they're getting a score of 1 through 36 in each of the sections. What you cannot do is just send the English score from one day and the math score from another day. What you can do is send 2 full sets of scores, and now the ACT actually does this for you with a super scored score report. Well, they're cherry pick the highest score from each section and give you your super scored composite score. You know, colleges like this for a couple reasons. One, in that it makes them look better. Right. So when you're looking, you know, online or in one of those FISC guides about, oh, what is this school's average SAT score, average ACT score, realize what you're looking at there are super scored numbers, because colleges are interested in putting together the most impressive number they can to talk about their incoming freshman class. So those numbers may reflect 2 or 3 sets of test scores being cobbled together. Different schools have different policies on that. Before the pandemic, it was the case that some schools ask students to send every score they've ever had. Georgetown did this, Yale did this, Notre Dame did this, where they did not honor score choice. And there was literally a question on the supplement that said, hey, please list every time you've taken an SAT and send us all the scores. I don't see anybody doing that right now post-pandemic. So by and large, yeah, you're in control of the scores. Nobody's going to know about a bad day unless you tell them. Phil?
But obviously, you know,
Is the super score cherry picking, is that a service you pay for, or do they?
So the ACT just started this past year, where they actually, when you send the ACT score, they'll send a super scored number that reflects like the highest number as well as the test date that you're sending. You're not paying extra for that. On the SAT, yeah, I mean, you're paying extra in that you're sending multiple tests and it costs a few bucks to send each one. The colleges then see everything, but they're really the ones on the SAT side who are doing the super scoring.
There's obviously a balancing act here. You know, given super scoring, some students end up erring on the side of testing and arguably over testing to try to get each of those prongs as high as possible. To totally generalize, most students will end up sitting for 2 or maybe 3 of these exams, somewhere between the beginning of 11th grade and the beginning of senior year. I think an enviable goal is that by the end of junior year, okay, by here, as a student, you really kind of want to have, if not your dream scores, at least reasonable scores in your pocket. Because at that point, you're going to be earnestly looking at colleges. And among other things, you're going to need to decide, okay, am I going to be someone for whom these scores are helpful at all my colleges or just at some? And if you have realistic numbers by the end of junior year, you can make some smart decisions. For some of your kids out there, they may decide to stop because even if their numbers have improved, maybe they will not get to a place where they're going to be useful as part of the college process. All that said, a majority of students will test one more time at the beginning of senior year and just try to squeeze out a few final points either on the ACT or SAT.
Yeah, if I can make 1 or 2 small points about calendar, Phil. One thing is math level, right? What level of math your students taking probably is the biggest academic factor that plays into this stuff, right? If I had to pick the course from which most of the math content comes, it's Algebra 2, right? That being said, there's a bit of pre-calculus on the SAT, and there is, especially in recent years, an increasing amount of pre-calculus on the ACT, more and more every test it seems. So if you have a kid who's advanced in math and took pre-calc sophomore year, then it's really easy to dive into this thing and be one of those overachievers that Phil was talking about, who works in the summer and gets this over in the fall of junior year. If on the other hand, your student's still taking pre-calculus, yeah, in junior year, which is a totally regular thing to do, right? Then there are going to maybe be some math holes that need to be plugged, or waiting farther into junior year might make sense, right? And then the final consideration for me is really just maturity level, right? You know your son, you know your daughter, right? If they're, you know, a little immature for their age, sometimes that last test in senior year can make a really big difference, right? Just giving the prefrontal cortex another 6 months to ripen, right? I've seen really big differences in kids who kind of are late bloomers in that way. So no real one key to success here. There are multiple ways to do this right.
Completely agree. Aaron, I realize maybe some of these nuts and bolts are worth quickly covering in terms of just the feel between the tests.
Yeah, you know, and so I talked about this a little bit for people who joined me in the breakout. You're right. If we had to point to one key difference, the most salient difference between the ACT and the SAT is timing, right? Most of us who do this professionally will agree that the hardest stuff on the SAT is probably harder than the hardest stuff on the ACT. And it is so because it's tricky, because it's messing with you, because it's not like what students see in school. On the other hand, the ACT, much more straightforward. The questions look more like the questions do in school. However, the price we pay is we have far, far, far less time to deal with those questions. So ACT, straightforward, speeded test. SAT, more power, deeper test, but you have more time to negotiate it, right? There are lots of things we can address on the time scale of 3 months of test prep. Your reading speed and your processing speed is not one of them, right? So there are certain kids whose reading speed and processing speed will never allow them to be super comfortable on the ACT. On the other hand, there are kids who can read quickly, but just can't untangle the denser texts on the SAT. So really, I back away from saying one test is easier or harder. It just depends on the way your brain's wired, right? So, you know, one test may be easier or harder for your son or daughter, which is why it is completely worth the time to take both of them and do an apples to apples comparison. In a perfect world, not just comparing the top numbers, but call up Phil, call up me, call up any of the professionals who were on this call who can do a little deeper dive with you and kind of let you know, not just, oh, what does this equate to this on some chart, but really, where is the ceiling? How are you running short on time? Do we think we can fix this, right? So getting into the nuts and bolts can be a little helpful. But yeah, biggest difference really is time versus trickiness versus straightforward. Anything to add to that, Phil?
The only thing that just crossed my mind is talking about those of you out there whose students get accommodations.
Oh yeah, of course.
Because this often connects to the speediness of the tests. So for starters, okay, the SAT and ACT will make a determination about your accommodations separately. These are two competing agencies that often reach the same conclusion, but are not bound to. You can typically get accommodations on the SAT well in advance of any particular test date, PSAT, SAT, or otherwise. Generally speaking, you receive accommodations on ACT when you actually apply to take a test. Yeah. So every once in a while, a student who's anxious about their accommodations might decide to sign up for a test that's far off just to make sure they get the approval that they're looking for and they know what accommodations they're entitled to. Yeah. Much like I said earlier, you don't want to make decisions based on charts. Same falls for accommodations. To generalize, given that the ACT is a harder test to finish and time is at more of a premium, you can certainly argue that extended time will play a bigger role for many students on the ACT. That's true. But sorry, I would still try them both before making that determination, because I'm still periodically surprised. I don't know about you, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the general rule of thumb is most students who are able to secure accommodations for both tests tend to do a bit better on the ACT because, yeah, extra time allows you to finish on the ACT. It allows you to stare at hard questions on the SAT and still not know what to do. But yeah, I certainly have had students for whom extended time SAT turned out to be a better fit. They're certainly more rare, but they're there. Also worth mentioning, the ACT, Jenna Godwin at the ACT really is on a quest in the last year to streamline the accommodations process. So this is pretty hot off the presses just in the last month or two. Generally, if your kid has an IEP or a 504 that actually mentions extended time or breaks or multi-day testing, that's now going to go through the ACT without much further approval, right? If you've got something listed in a 504 IEP, the ACT is going to grant that accommodation if it exists on the test almost automatically. So that's a new change. They're streamlining their system, which is great, especially for public school students. For private school students, it's not so great because they don't have 504s. But for public school students, yes, if you've got a 504, you've got a pretty good shot at getting those accommodations.
I think we're at the place where we should definitely take questions and just react off those last ones. So I don't know if there are any sitting in the chat.
Some schools, not others. Yeah.
Yeah, Kate, thank you so much. That's really, your support is so valuable. We're so happy to have you at BCC, and this overview is really fascinating. So thank you all to our panelists who have been here. If anyone has, we have time for, I think, one more question. If there's a question out there. Let's see. Yes. And okay, here we go. In accommodations, if 504 IEP, does that make it automatic, or is there an
There's an applications process. You still have to go through it, but it's going to streamline that process and make it into a very, very fast process rather than a long review. You still need to do it, working through the school.
Got it. This presentation is recorded, and these lovely fellows have agreed to let us share that. So their presentation will be in that recording. We will certainly circulate that, Steph's iPad. And so before we let you all go, we really wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of, we popped in the chat our mailer, which you should be receiving in your mailbox any day now, which lists our events for the year. And of note are the mock ACT and the mock SAT, and then the debrief sessions that are occurring afterwards. Tina, do you want to fill in the details here? And then I will put the vendor list in while you do that.
Sure. So the mock ACT will be conducted on November 6th at 8 a.m. Again, this is in the postcard that's been distributed by email and you all will receive in your mailboxes. And as of now, I can imagine it's probably going to be done virtually, but we'll know for sure as we get closer. And then we have the, let me check, we have the, what is it, the debrief, which is really valuable, as Prep Matters will talk with us about what the scores mean, and that will be a week later on November 11th at 7 p.m. I really encourage both parents and students to attend the Understanding Your Results event on November 11th. The mock SAT will be on Saturday, December 8th, also at 8 a.m. Of course, that's only for students, and probably going to be virtual as well.
I'm sorry, I think it's the 11th.
Right. Did I say something? Excuse me, December 11th. Yep. And then on December 16th will be the Understanding Your Results, and that will be led by Capital Educators.
Kate, you're still here. There's some information about the day-long seminars that's being requested. Pablo, Kate's, I think, answering your question about when you would recommend students to take it, really pending that math, whatever math your child is in is a good option. But all 10th graders, as Kate mentioned, will take the PSAT, is that right? And so they'll get a sense of what that experience is like and where they might need support at that time. Thank you, Erin. Yeah, deciding which tests to take or how to take the tests versus doing all the prep is a good thing to separate. Thank you for that. We are at time. Anything else from Prep Matters, Capital Educators, or Montgomery College before we wrap up?
Just to thank you.
Yep, thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone.